The arena pulsed with anticipation. Thousands packed the seats, hungry for a fight that was more than just a boxing match. This was a collision of two worlds: Jake Paul, the brash influencer turned boxer, and Julio César Chávez Jr., son of a boxing legend. The lights blazed down on the ring, amplifying the tension. For months, this fight dominated headlines and social media. Could Jake Paul prove he was more than hype? Could he topple a former world champion? Most experts doubted him, but his fans believed in his power and drive. The stadium buzzed with nervous energy. This was a true test, one that would define both men. The pre-fight buildup was fiery: insults, threats, and promises of a knockout. Chavez Jr. vowed to defend his family's legacy and silence the YouTuber. Jake Paul wanted respect and a place in boxing's history. Both men had everything to lose. For Chavez Jr., it was redemption or ruin. For Paul, it was legitimacy or humiliation. The world watched as the fighters prepared backstage. The stakes had never been higher. The pressure was suffocating. The final chapter was about to be written in the ring. The night of reckoning had arrived. The crowd's roar was deafening. The fighters' names echoed through the arena. This was more than a fight. It was a moment that would change everything. The ring was set, the storylines written. All that remained was the battle itself. Two men, two legacies, one night. The world held its breath. The bell was about to ring. History was waiting. The fighters stepped into the light. The war was about to begin. Jake Paul entered as the villain, thriving on the booze. He called himself the problem child, and he relished the chaos. He wasn't a traditional boxer. He was a disruptor, a product of the internet. But in the ring, he'd shown real power and surprising skill. Tonight, he faced his toughest test: Julio César Chávez Jr. Chávez Jr. carried the weight of a legendary name and a world title. He'd fought the best, lived the sport since birth. This was old-school boxing versus new-age fame. Paul represented a new era, where popularity could earn you a main event. Chávez Jr. was the old guard, forged by years of sacrifice. Purists wanted Chávez Jr. to win, to defend boxing's honor. Paul was seen as an outsider, an intruder, but both men had something to prove. Paul needed to show he was more than a celebrity. Chávez Jr. needed to prove he still belonged at the top. For Paul, this was about respect. For Chávez Jr., it was about legacy. The fight was a battle for the soul of boxing. Two men, two paths, one ring. The stakes were personal. The tension was real. Only one would leave with their future intact. The bell was about to sound. The world was watching. The fight for respect had begun. Jake Paul's entrance triggered a tidal wave of boos. The arena shook with hostility. Fans on their feet, signs mocking him, chants for Chávez Jr. Paul smirked, feeding off the hate, playing the villain to perfection. When Chávez Jr. entered, the mood flipped. Cheers thundered, Mexican flags waved, hope filled the air. He was their hero, fighting for pride and tradition. The atmosphere was electric, tense, and deeply emotional. Every move Paul made was met with jeers. The crowd had chosen their side. This was more than a fight, it was a cultural clash. The noise was relentless, a wall of sound. For most, that pressure would be crushing. But Paul thrived on it, turning boos into focus. He was the outsider, the disruptor. The crowd's energy only sharpened his resolve. As the referee called them to the center, the roar peaked. The fans wanted a hero. They wanted a villain to fall. The fighters locked eyes. The tension was at its breaking point. The stage was set for a battle that would echo far beyond the ring. The bell was seconds away. The world was watching. The fight was about to explode. Let the war begin. The bell rang, and the war began. Chávez Jr. started strong, using his jab and experience to test Paul. The crowd roared with every punch from their hero. But Paul stayed composed, showing patience and maturity. He kept his guard high, moved his head, and waited for openings. The boos didn't faze him. He was locked in. As the round progressed, Paul found his rhythm. He landed a stiff jab, then a hard right hand, his signature punch. The crowd fell silent, realizing Paul's power was real. The fight became a tactical chess match. Chávez Jr. tried to outbox Paul, but Paul used his size and strength to push back. He landed the harder shots, shifting the momentum. The early confidence in the crowd began to fade. The YouTuber was proving he belonged. The first round set the tone, a battle of skill, will, and heart. Paul was not just surviving, he was competing. Chávez Jr. was in a real fight. The test of wills was underway. Every round, the stakes grew higher. The fighters traded blows, neither willing to back down. The crowd watched in disbelief. The underdog was rising. the fight was far from over. The tension was palpable. The next rounds would decide everything. The war raged on. In the middle rounds, Jake Paul seized control. He pressed forward, unleashing powerful combinations to the body and head. Chavez Jr. began to tire, spending more time on the ropes. Paul's relentless pressure wore him down. The crowd's cheers turned to anxious silence. Paul landed a huge overhand right, staggering Chavez Jr. at the end of the fifth. The bell saved Chavez Jr., but the momentum had shifted. Paul looked fresh, bouncing on his toes, while Chavez Jr. faded. Every punch drained the veteran's energy. Paul picked his shots, landing at will. By the seventh round, the outcome seemed clear. Paul was dominating. Chavez Jr. showed heart, refusing to go down, but he had no answer for Paul's attack. The narrative had flipped. The influencer was outclassing the former champion. The boos faded into stunned silence. The impossible was happening before their eyes. Paul's conditioning and preparation were paying off. He was in complete control. The fight was slipping away from Chavez Jr. The crowd sensed it. Paul was rewriting his story in real time. The pressure was unrelenting. The rounds ticked by. The upset was unfolding. The world was witnessing a new force in boxing. The end was near. The crowd could only watch. Paul was on the verge of history. The final rounds were a test of heart. Chavez Jr., exhausted and behind, fought on pride alone. He swung wildly, hoping for a miracle. The crowd tried to will him back, but Paul stayed disciplined. He controlled the distance, landing clean shots and avoiding danger. In the last minute, both men traded punches in the center of the ring. A dramatic finish. Paul's shot snapped Chavez Jr.'s head back, but the veteran fired back with adrenaline. The crowd roared at the final exchange. The bell rang. Both men had given everything. But it was clear, Jake Paul had dominated. He climbed the ropes, arms raised in triumph. The boos returned, but Paul didn't care. He had faced his toughest test and won. Chavez Jr. walked back to his corner, battered but proud. A new star had arrived. The old guard had fallen. The torch had been passed. Boxing had a new headline. The fighters waited for the decision. Tension thick in the air. The crowd clung to hope, but the outcome was clear. Jake Paul had been the aggressor, landing more and harder punches. The scores were red unanimous decision for Jake Paul. The boos erupted. A wave of disappointment. Paul embraced the hate, jumping on the ropes, taunting the crowd. He grabbed the mic. "What now? I told you I'd do this. I beat a real boxer." The crowd's anger only fueled his celebration. Paul's message was defiant. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. He declared himself the new face of boxing. He hadn't just won the fight, he'd owned the moment. The villain had triumphed. The critics were silenced. Paul stood alone in the spotlight. The world had to take notice. Boxing had a new king of controversy. This was Jake Paul's defining victory. He'd shattered the Novelty Act label. By beating Chavez Jr., a former world champion, Paul proved he was a real contender. He dominated over 10 rounds, showing skill, power, and discipline. The critics had to admit, Paul could fight. He earned respect, even if grudgingly. This was the night he became more than a YouTuber. The win would likely earn him a world ranking and bigger fights. He was no longer a sideshow. He was a threat. In a hostile arena, against a skilled opponent, Paul arrived as a force in boxing. The sport had to take him seriously. The landscape had changed. The problem child was now a legitimate contender. Boxing's future had a new face. With this win, Jake Paul's future is wide open. He can choose his next opponent. Another champion, a top contender, or a crossover superstar. A world title shot is now a real possibility. He's changed the business of boxing, bringing new eyes and new energy. Whether he faces boxers or MMA legends, every fight will be an event. Paul has silenced doubters and built a massive platform. The next chapter promises even more drama and spectacle. Love him or hate him, you can't ignore him. This was not the end, just the beginning. The world will be watching his every move. Boxing has a new disruptor. The journey continues. The future is now for Jake Paul.